On October 11th last year, a fishing boat carrying around 400 men, women, and children sank off the coast of Lampedusa. The people on board this boat were refugees from Syria. They had initially fled to Libya, but then they were pushed by the increasing violence and insecurity there to seek a safer place for themselves and their children. Entire families boarded that boat to make this journey of hope, we can call it. It's estimated that between 100 to 150 of those on board were possibly children. As this boat left the coast of Libya, it was shot at by what looked like a military or a Coast Guard vessel. Nobody really knows exactly who it was or why they shot at this boat carrying refugees, but what's certain is that the bullets pierced the hull of the vessel. They injured some people on board, but also they damaged the boat, which immediately started taking in water. So as the boat continued on its way, the passengers tried to bail out the water. But by the time they reached this point, around 100 kilometers from Lampedusa, it was clear they had a massive problem because the boat had taken in too much water and the entire lower deck was submerged. The engine had stalled and it was clear that the boat was at risk of sinking. So, since they were so close to Lampedusa, they called the Italian Coast Guard to ask for assistance, only to be told that they should call the Maltese authorities because they were the ones responsible for search and rescue in that area. So they gave them the number and they made the call. The Maltese authorities assured them help is on its way. This was late morning, maybe around midday or a little bit after. So time went by and they were waiting and the panic was mounting. You can imagine, or maybe we can't imagine, what it must be like to be stuck on a boat in the middle of the sea, completely helpless, unable to do anything to save yourself or your children. By their own accounts, when they made the calls, they were desperate. They were crying, please, we're Syrians, we're in a dangerous situation, the boat is going down, we have hundreds of children on board, we're going to die, please, please help us. But unfortunately, less than an hour before help reached them, at around 5:10 in the afternoon, the boat sank and took with it hundreds of people. It's estimated that 260 people lost their lives and that 60 to 100 of these were children. Only 26 bodies were recovered and 212 people were saved. And the survivors were taken to Malta, some of them, others to Sicily, and others to Lampedusa. So you can imagine that the days that followed their arrival in Malta were complete chaos and confusion. All the survivors were hoping that their loved ones, their children, their wife, their father, their mother were among the survivors. But in fact, there were very few survivors in Lampedusa and Sicily, so for many of them, they had to accept that their loved ones were no more. There were people who lost their entire family, their wife and all of their children in this tragedy. And in those terrible days, these people were meeting with anyone who would listen to them. They met with government officials, with NGOs, with journalists. They were trying to understand what happened, how this terrible, terrible thing could have been allowed to happen. And at one meeting, I was present, one man who lost two young sons in the tragedy, was explaining the sequence of events, how they called and waited, and to him it seemed that their pleas fell on deaf ears. And it was so clear that he felt that, a little bit faster and my children would be alive. But then, at one point, he said, of course, we're not blaming you for the death of our children. We're not stupid. We know. We killed our children. And his words left me completely cold. First of all, because as a parent, I can't imagine what it must be like to live with that thought. But perhaps more because a part of me thought, no, you didn't. We did. Your children are dead because of the walls that we put up to protect ourselves. Asylum seekers make this journey because they have no choice, because it's the only way to get protection. Many of the people on this boat had passports, valid, original, authentic passports. Many of them were professionals, educated, well-connected. Normally, they would have been able to get a visa. Yet, they spoke of spending weeks or months touring embassies, trying to get a visa, and being rejected. Because the truth is that once you become a refugee, once it is clear that you need protection and that you are coming to apply for it, then the doors are all closed. It's practically impossible to get a visa, to travel legally, to get protection. And even once people reach Europe, it's not over. There are other walls that they have to contend with before they get protection. In Malta, which is where I come from, people who arrive by boat, even if they're asylum seekers, are detained because of their irregular migration status. And they stay in detention until their asylum application is processed, which can take months. On average, 6 to 8, some less, but some more. Those who are rejected spend 18 months in detention, which is very long. The only exceptions are those who are considered vulnerable and those qualify for early release after their case is assessed. I think it's really difficult for someone who has never been detained to understand just how much hardship, how much suffering it causes. The people I meet in detention, they talk about being profoundly changed by their experience. One woman told me, "This detention, it is so hard. You don't recognize the person you have become." And in fact, research conducted by JRS Europe in 23 EU member states with 600 detainees showed that, yes, detention does cause a deterioration in detainees' physical and mental health. It's a place of great, great suffering. In the words of one detainee from Ghana, who is in detention at the moment in Malta, detention is the dark side of the world, the starvation of the soul, he says. Besides the hardship, detention can also violate human rights. And in fact, Malta's law and policy on detention and the conditions in which migrants are held have been repeatedly found to violate human rights. Yet, we're assured that detention is necessary, that it's the only way to safeguard national security. Even once people are outside and the physical walls are gone, there are still other walls to scale. My job, I'm a lawyer, among other things, is to advocate for individual asylum seekers and for better treatment for asylum seekers and migrants arriving in Malta generally. So essentially, it's about bringing down these walls, or at least lessening the impact of these walls on people's lives. And I think over time, what I came to realize is that one of the hardest things about this job is that we're not fighting an external enemy. We're not fighting this disembodied, anonymous system of border controls that exists outside of us. No. We're fighting walls that we built and we keep there, walls that are a reflection of our fears, our indifference, our willingness to protect what we have, even if it is at the cost of someone else. And what I realize is that I must acknowledge that I too, I cannot disclaim responsibility for these walls. I too am part of the society that put them there. So faced with the enormity of this task, it's very, very easy to lose hope. It's happened to me so many times. When you work so hard for so many years, when you see so many people suffering and nothing seems to change, the easiest thing to do is to lower your expectations and to accept that nothing will change. And the most you can do is just make things better for some people. One Jesuit brother who worked with JRS for many years in Thailand, I think it was, he calls this a rationalized discouragement. However, he says that we are called to go beyond this, not to avoid it, because we can't, but to go into it and through it to a renewed, refined, and more realistic hope. And he says that this is the road that helps us to realize that the best service we can give refugees is to be with them, to stick it out with them, and to hope against hope with them. I think our hope is more realistic because it's based not on our efforts, but on the knowledge that our efforts, small and insignificant as they are, because they are in fact, are part of something bigger. They're part of an enterprise that started before me and will go on long after I am gone. To quote the words of a reflection, which is attributed to Oscar Romero, part of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. God's vision for the world is so different from the one that we created in our image and likeness. Isaiah 25 talks about a banquet for all peoples, a table where everyone has a place. A world where God himself wipes the tears from people's faces. And a world where the high walls of the impregnable fortress are no more. So I live and I work in the hope that my efforts contribute in some way, which I don't always understand, towards this vision. And although I'm very aware of my limitations and how weak and poor my faith is very often, I'm very aware that also God is able to do infinitely more than I can ever ask or imagine. So this knowledge gives me great hope, as does the fact that I don't walk alone. I walk with so many other people within the JRS family and beyond who share this vision, who share this hope. Not least refugees, who in spite of everything keep hoping that they will be received, that they will find protection, that they will be able to live with dignity. And over the years, if I look back, over the years I've been doing this job, I think refugees' faith, their testimonies of faith, have been one of the greatest sources of hope for me. And over the years, I've set up a kind of mental database of incidents, of testimonies, of words, of phrases, of images. And I'd like to leave you with one, the latest in my collection. Just last week, I had the great privilege of being able to visit a JRS project in Delhi, because I happened to be in India for something else. And this is a project for Chin refugees, and the visit was essentially a meeting with this group of refugees who receive services, who attend JRS activities. And the meeting was in a small room, in a flat, in a rather poor area of the city. And it started with a prayer and a song. And so they stood up to sing, and the song they chose was the anthem of the civil rights, or the unofficial anthem of the civil rights movement, "We Shall Overcome." And as I sat there and I listened to them sing, and I thought, if you, who face so many walls on a daily basis, can stand up and affirm that, yes, someday we shall overcome, how can I not hope with you? How can I not stand and affirm that, yes, I believe that together, one day, by the grace of God, will overcome. Thank you.